listeners, and welcome to The Floor, where we talk about fantasy and lore from the ground up. I'm your host, Aaron.
I'm Joe Bondowski.
And I'm Eli. So we're going to launch into Cyberpunk as we're getting excited for Cyberpunk 2077 coming out. So I really thought it'd be a good idea for us to really encapsulate what Cyberpunk is and how it's kind of come about and what it is when we're talking about Cyberpunk. A lot of people know what you're talking about when you say fantasy, but they don't always make the leap of Cyberpunk to other sci-fi genres. I wanted to cover a bunch of that with you guys. I know I brought up the book Neuromancer before by William Gibson.
Yeah.
Joe, I know you were really getting into that and
yes.
You were making connections of... Yeah, go ahead.
So well, I guess I really dug into kind of the early roots of Cyberpunk. And so if we go back to the 1940s and the 1950s, right after the end of World War II, we have we transition from the Industrial Revolution to the technological revolution. And we start to get all kinds of gadgets and machines. And this idea begins to come up that utopia will be reached through technology. It is technology that's going to get us to this utopia. And you can kind of see this in a lot of the machines, like all kinds of magazines and articles were being written about the great future that was coming because of all these technological advancements that were saving time and improving the life quality of everybody. One of the places where you really see this manifested is like in the Jetsons. They live in this kind of utopia, but they still have normal human problems. Cyberpunk is kind of a reaction to this. I think really at the core of Cyberpunk is people looking at it and saying technology will not bring utopia. Will we be just as terrible people then as we are now? And it will just change kind of these basic functions of life. But that utopia has to be built by humans intentionally building it. Technology won't do it for us.
Right. Like one of the core aspects of what Cyberpunk is you see an increase in technology, but a decrease in humanity, or maybe more so that technology is replacing our humanity.
That's terrifying, and that is a really good way to describe it, because, yeah.
So anytime you step into Cyberpunk, what you see is, people have all kinds of technology at their fingertips, and a lot of times even integrated into their body, and yet they just live in this awful squalor. Around them, the world is just dilapidated and decaying and disgusting, despite the fact that there are robots everywhere and they've got, all kinds of high-tech gear integrated into their bodies to make them faster, stronger, all of that. And yet still, they're worse off than they were before all that tech.
And then the net matrix or whichever, story you're in, that's always a better place you could be.
Yes, definitely. So, and I do want to talk about the Matrix and the net and all of that, just because this was super, super interesting as I studied it. So I think Cyberpunk is really born out of Blade Runner. That's kind of the really first piece of media in any form that kind of is serious about the genre. Philip K. Dick, who wrote Blade Runner, definitely has, inspirations that he cites. But I think Blade Runner...
Well, he wrote Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?
Yes.
The movie adaptation is called Blade Runner.
And then they renamed Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, so it's now Blade Runner, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and when did that book come out?
That's 1962 or 4, if I remember correctly. Let me double check.
Okay, so that was a long time ago.
Blade Runner, or Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, that comes out in 1968.
Okay, and that's way before basically anything else that was thought of as cyberpunk, correct?
So, like Joe was saying, like that time period, science was kind of becoming cool, and there were a collection of writers at that time creating this kind of background that is going to come together and start inspiring more true to the what we see today of cyberpunk. I know we were just kind of taking a second on that book, but there's other stories.
Well, before we get too far ahead, I wanna talk about the net and the Matrix and the origins. So the author of Blade Runner, he loved the work of Carl Jung, and Carl Jung had this idea in psychology of this collective unconscious, right? This shared piece of information that humanity had. And within that, he would talk about like the archetypes that are so common in pieces of literature, the wise old man, the hero. And one of his theories behind why you see that repetition across all these cultures was this collective unconscious. Well, Philip K. Dick, in his novel, Blade Runner, he takes this idea and he creates what is called the empathy box. And they're all linked together. And it exists in this hope to help humanity increase their empathy. But he introduces this idea that is this technological linked network of all humanity. And I think that's really the first time we see that in literature or any kind of media. And then, of course, Neuromancer then builds on this and calls it the Matrix, where it's not just, this place to develop empathy. It's just this storage place of knowledge, which is, infinite because people just keep adding to it. And I mean, essentially, the internet is, as it comes along later, is what he would have called the Matrix. So I think that's just an interesting through line there.
Yeah.
So you were talking about Neuromancer, right?
Just in general, you've got Neuromancer. I wanted to go over some of the early collections. There's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Harlan Ellison, he was a writer, and he did a lot of short stories. I found him through a story that's called I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream.
Oh, I've heard of this.
So this is one where the super AIs. So the whole world it's a short story, but it's a great story. The whole world is covered in like skyscraper complexes. We've covered the entire Earth with it. And the technology grew so much that we developed AIs to fight our wars against each other. At one point, there's just 3 AIs controlling 3 different sectors of the world, warring against each other. And one day they merge together and turn on humanity with just pure hatred and starts wiping out all of humanity. Then it realizes that's if it kills all the humans, it can't torture humans anymore. So he keeps 5 alive and just tortures them through forcing them through these complexes, throwing monsters at them, starving them, and then has regenerative things that'll come and heal them and bring them back to life from whatever things he's throwing at them. And this is where that first the AIs will take over humanity. One of those early inspirational stories that is heavy in the cyberpunk world.
Yeah. I know this is probably not exactly accurate, but this kind of sounds like Maze Runner. Obviously, in that situation, it's a bunch of humans throwing humans in there, but they do have advanced technology and that fear and that overarching just...
Yeah, I think with Maze Runner, once we get out of the mazes, the world has that very cyberpunk feel. So cyberpunk is post-apocalyptic. Whether we're talking, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep or Neuromancer, all of them are post-apocalyptic worlds where there is definitely this wasteland. I think Eli mentioned as we were preparing for this that Night City, where you're going to have Cyberpunk 2077 taking place, it's got these huge skyscrapers and there's lots of technology. But once you get outside of that, you're looking at a world that's more resemblant of Mad Max. It's this desolate wasteland left by the nuclear apocalypse, and there's just roving gangs. I think you definitely see more technology out there than you would in a Mad Max film, but at the same time, it's going to be very much that wasteland feel with the roaming gangs. I think Judge Dredd is definitely a good example of cyberpunk. I remember in the movie at one point, one of the judges retires and they basically arm him and then send him out into the wastes to bring law to the lawless. So I also think that's an interesting aspect of the cyberpunk world, is that you have these desolate wastelands out there.
Yeah, usually your environments are a stark difference, and there's a clear difference between who has the money and who doesn't. Like with Cyberpunk 2077, there's gonna definitely be the corporate class and then the street class of people, and then the nomads. I think those are the three main ones that you'll be picking from. And it's an extreme difference to I live in a tent or
just a cubby, like a little cubby on the wall. Yeah.
Right. I don't have a covering. I just have a sheet in front of it, and this is where I live.
But like the goal and the mindset of the hero is kind of the same, because like Eli was telling me earlier when we were talking about this, the mindset of the hero in something cyberpunk versus, fantasy like Baldur's Gate, which was fascinating. If you want to talk about it, Eli, do you remember?
Yeah. Mike Pondsmith, the guy who has written Cyberpunk from the very beginning when it was Cyberpunk 2013, and he's been involved with it all along the way, and he's involved with what's coming out as well. He likes to say, in Cyberpunk, you don't save the world, you save yourself.
Yeah, that is definitely a theme in Cyberpunk, for sure. You don't save the world, you save yourself.
And having a food run be a campaign run, like a run for the night, like that's a legit thing to put in that world. As simple as we're just trying to get some food.
We don't die.
Because it's a brutal world.
Let's take a quick break here, and then when we come back, we will talk about the transition from Neuromancer to Cyberpunk the game, some of the evolutions there, and the branch off that is Shadowrun.
So when you're playing Skyrim and you see those orphans, they ask you for a coin, and then you give it to them and you get good karma for the rest of the day. We're basically those orphans, except we actually benefit your life. Those orphans don't do jack for you in the game, if you noticed. But for us, we benefit you in a lot of ways with our awesome Flora podcast. So consider donating to our Patreon.
I feel like we are not orphans. I feel like that's wildly inaccurate.
That's what I'm saying. We're better. I agree.
Well, we kind of are orphans. Like the podcast is an orphan podcast. We don't have any podcast mommy or daddies.
Exactly.
What just happened here? How did the bard roll a 20 on his persuasion on the cleric? How are you both on the same side of this nonsense?
Bard always rolls a 20 on persuasion on the cleric.
I need to go repent.
Head over to the Patreon, guys. You'll love it.
Okay, so in our first half here, we talked about some of the origins of cyberpunk, this idea that technology would bring utopia, and how cyberpunk pushed back at this, presenting a very dystopian world that has an excess and just overload of technology, and yet it doesn't bring that utopia. In fact, most people are still living in squalor, whether that's in the cities or out in these wastelands that are kind of more of a Mad Max experience kind of place. Both are just this idea that technology has, skyrocketed and the quality of human life has fallen out. Not only that, but the very adventure core of whether a novel, movie, television show, or even a cyberpunk campaign is this idea that you're not going to save the world like you would in a kind of fantasy story. You're just going to save yourself.
Yeah, because with an overabundance of technology, it seems that there is a decline in empathy or human connection, which is just a really fun thing and terrifying thing to think about as we roll into this next segment.
I guess if I could just reference a couple of movies here. One is the of course, Blade Runner. And again, he's not out to save the world. He's just exterminating these 4 androids because he's put under pressure by the police, where they're saying,
it's his job.
It's not his job. He's quit the police force. They hunt him down and bring him back because he was the best at this. And essentially, the guy in charge tells him this thing. He says, you're either police or you're little people. And the little people, they can die accidentally in any kind of police pursuit. And so essentially, he's being threatened with his own death here. Do this or you might just get killed on accident in some police procedure, right? You're police or you're little people.
Well, in the book, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? He's kind of got this proud point of he wants to upgrade his pet, which is an android, but like the relationship he's having with his wife, he's worried is falling apart. And so he thinks if he can make enough money to get a better pet, that it'll fix his marriage.
I think that is a beautiful spin on cyberpunk, right? Because the whole idea of cyberpunk is that technology does not make your life better. You have to do that. And his idea on how to make his life better is to upgrade his technology.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And then he's roped into this horrible gun shoot 'em out scenario and has to hunt down killer robots.
I wouldn't say horrible. It's a pretty good movie, but or book, but
well, for an individual to have to go through it.
Well, when you put it like that, it sounds awful.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about. So we have do androids dream of electric sheep, and then of course Neuromancer builds on that, but it is definitely its own thing. In Neuromancer, we experience a lot of transhumanism, right? People have all kinds of upgrades in their bodies themselves, whereas in androids there are androids and all kinds of technology, but the technology is not grafted into the people like we see in Neuromancer. In Neuromancer, like he's got his sidekick who's got like blades in her arms and different things like this, and of course he has some kind of upgrade to his brain, or at least close to his brain, that allows him to jack into the Matrix.
Yeah,
and like I said, this is really the world that Cyberpunk is built in. In fact, this is the first reference we get to Night City, which of course is where Cyberpunk 2077 will take place.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Floor. If you liked what you were hearing, or even if you didn't, feel free to leave us a review or comment down below. We'd love to get some feedback. We want to know, what did we miss? What do you want to hear more about? What did Eli and Joe get wrong? Obviously, I got nothing wrong. If you see our ads, like, comment, or even share them. That means that helps us know that they're working. And please tell your friends about us. We'd love to get some more feedback. We love being able to share our passion for lore with you, and we'd love you to be able to share it with your friends. Send us corrections. We do as much research as we can, but I'm sure a lot of you can imagine any in-depth lore. There's a lot of stuff we could have missed. If you do want to talk to us or have us do a specific episode, either leave a comment below or email us at floor, FLORE, .fantasylore@gmail.com. Again, that's floor, FLORE, .fantasylore@gmail.com. You can find us on patreon.com/floorfantasyandlore. Thank you so much for listening. And now that we've given you the foundation and the floor, go and build your story.